Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, we're getting back in the swing of things with more in our Linux command line series. Joining us in the studio yet again, you know him, you love him, he's our good friend, Mr. Don Pezet. Don, welcome back, sir. How's it going today?
Hey, it is going great, Daniel. Ready to dive right back into the command line. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at working with files, right? In the last episode, or earlier ones, we got a chance to look at the ls command and how we could look at the file system, we could navigate the file system and get around. But the whole point about the file system is that it's got files in it. So we should probably learn a little bit about messing around with those files. So that's what we're going to take a look at right here in this episode.
All right, Don, when you say messing around with files, I assume you mean manipulating them, looking at them, moving them, doing stuff like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And let's start with looking at them, right?
Okay.
So just being able to see the contents of a file is an important thing. We've already seen the contents of files through various other utilities, like when we ran the man command to view man pages. Manual pages are really just files stored on the hard drive somewhere, and it finds them and retrieves them and puts them on the screen. But as you work with the operating system, you're going to want to view files as well, either your own files or configuration files. Maybe I just want to see how the OS is configured. I need to see those files. So we're going to do that right here, and I'll start with one of the oldest Unix commands, one that is present in every operating system. It is the cat command, C-A-T. And what cat does is it lets us take the data from inside of a file and display it on the screen, right? We can just take it and export it and bring it into what's called the standard out, which is your screen. That's what you see. So for example, here on my system, I have a copy of the full text of Moby Dick, which Daniel had suggested. That came from Project Gutenberg. Moby Dick is a massive novel, so I figured this was a pretty good example.
Plenty of text to work with. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I want to read this, if I want to see the data that's inside of that file, I can use the cat command. And I can just say cat Moby Dick, if I can spell it, Moby Dick text. There we go. All right. So I can type that in, and it's going to basically use that text file as the input to feed that into the cat command, which will then display it on the screen. All right. So if we want to read it, there we go. And that was it. We just read Moby Dick in record time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I hope you're Superman or something like that, because that was pretty quick flash by.
Yeah, that's the thing about the cat command is that no holds barred, right? No, it pulls no punches. It
no
throws
training wheels.
All the text right at you all at once. Now, if you've got a file that just contains one or two lines, the cat command is great. It'll show those one or two lines, and that's it. But Moby Dick is thousands of pages long or whatever. It's a massive amount of data. And so while the cat command is handy, it can be a little bit on the excessive side. And so while it is a very old tool, one that's been around a long time, one that is there to be used, I admittedly don't use it very often because there are other utilities we can use that help with that, right? For example, the more utility. More is just like cat, except it creates little pauses every 24 lines so that you can read the text and then move forward. Just a little more handy, a little more human, right? The cat command is really useful when we're doing scripting. When I want to take the contents of one file and dump it into another file, I don't need page breaks. That's not a human operation. It's a script doing it. Just give me all the text at once and let me throw it over here. That's what cat does. But as a human, the more command is better. And if I do more and I provide that, I'm going to use tab autocomplete. I cannot type today.
Yeah.
With the command line, you've got tab autocomplete, which is nice. So you type the first couple of characters and hit tab, and it fills it out the rest of the way. So I'll do more mobydick.txt. And this time when I run it, see how it stopped? And here's the very beginning. We get that famous first line, the call me Ishmael, right? And then here it goes, and we get the text. And I can see I'm 0% of the way through this novel. And if I press the space bar, it jumps to the next page. And the next page, and the next page. And unfortunately, this novel is so long that I'm still 0% of the way through. But if I hold that space bar, I'm 8%.
You're 8%, son.
this would take a while to get through. But I can scroll through now, and I get pagination. So when you know you're going to be looking at something that is longer than one screen, right? Or if you just don't want to scroll back, because I do have my scroll back buffer here in my terminal.
Hold on, I was reading that.
Yeah. So I can always use my scrollback buffer if I've got one. I might not have a scrollback buffer if I'm using like the physical console of a machine. I wouldn't have that. But this gives me that page break. Every 24 lines, I can read, I can advance, and we can move forward. Now, there's really 3 kind of keystrokes we need to remember with the more command. One is the space bar. That's what I was just using. Every time I hit space, it advances a page. Okay. There's also the enter key. And if I press enter, it's moving one line. If I just want to go ahead one line, it's the enter key. If I want to go a full page or 24 lines, that's space. So enter in space. And if I reach the end of this document, which eventually would happen, then enter or space will actually exit the document. I've reached the end. But if I want to get out of it right now, I'm 9% of the way through. I don't want to get the rest of the way. I can just hit Q on the keyboard, and Q will take me out, and now I'm out of the file, and now I'll never learn about what happens to Queequegs and Viciousol. So we had space for moving ahead a page, enter for moving ahead a line, and Q for quitting out, right? If you remember those 3 things, those are the 3 most useful things to use inside of the more command. But just think of more as like cat for humans. Cat is great for programmatic operations. More is great for humans.
Now, Don, there's a similar command to more called less. Am I correct?
Yes, there is. And honestly, I use less more than I use more. This gets really confusing. So the more command is the original one that adds pagination to pretty much anything. But more has some limitations. For example, more only moves forward, right? So what if I'm reading Moby Dick? Here, let me clear my screen. And I'm reading it, and I move forward a few pages, and I'm like, oh, shoot, I want to go back a page. Well, too bad. More only goes forward, and that's it. So somebody came up with a new utility, a more on steroids, as they came up with a creative name of less. And unlike the name implies, less actually has more features than the more command. So sometimes less is more.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's the witty joke that's supposed to go along with that. But if I do less, and I say less, mobydick.txt, when I pull that up, it looks a lot like more. Okay, it's not giving me my percentage at the bottom, but otherwise it kind of looks the same. And if I hit the space bar, I go forward a page. And if I press enter, I go forward a line. And if I press Q, I exit it. So far, it's exactly like the more command. Okay, but let me show you the big difference here. If I move forward, I can also move back. I can use my up and down arrow keys to go forward and backwards through this file. All right, so I'm just hitting up and down the arrow keys. I can also hit page down and page up, and it's honoring those. More doesn't honor page down and page up. So if you have page up and page down keys on your keyboard, you can hit those and you can move backwards and forwards. So now I just returned all the way back to the top of the document, or I can go forward like that. So I get a lot more flexibility with this command, the ability to easily scroll forwards and backwards, and that makes less a lot more common for me. I'll use it because it gives me the ability to move around in the text like that, and that's a pretty handy thing. Now, less actually added a lot of other features too, features that some of which are implemented more, some aren't. For example, I can do a search if I want to search for a term. So when we originally pulled this document up before the show, I got it from Project Gutenberg. They're a free service. They take classic literature and they turn it into text files, make it available for free. They had appended, for whatever reason, like 500 lines of text to the beginning of this file that were all just junk. And so I had to find out where the book actually started. And I remembered it starts with "Call me Ishmael," right? That's that famous first line. And so what I did is from the beginning of the book, I did a search. I searched for that string. And in both less and more, you can hit the / on your keyboard, and now we can do a search. And so I could search for "Call me Ishmael." And the hardest part there is remembering how to spell Ishmael, which I'll be honest with you, I didn't remember. So I actually searched for "Call me." I searched for. And I searched, and it found it. It took me right to that line. Now that works in more as well as less. And if I want to search again, like maybe I actually am searching for Ishmael, right? So I want to know every time Ishmael is mentioned in the novel, right? And so I do a / I type Ishmael and I do a search, and it found him. And then I can search again. I can hit / and press enter, and now it searches again. And it keeps moving forward and forward, and I can search through the whole novel looking for that. I'm already in chapter 8, chapter 11. We're cruising right through this novel. That's really neat. That works in more. But in less, not only can I search forward, I can search backwards as well. It was a forward slash to search forward. It's a question mark to search backwards. Now, that might not sound intuitive. You might say to yourself, why didn't they use the backslash to search backwards? Wouldn't that make sense? And the reason is, if you look at your keyboard, at least on a standard US keyboard, the forward slash and the question mark share the same key. So that's why they use it. That becomes your search key. And the default is forward, which is the forward slash, and then the question is backwards.
Don, I believe a hotkey combination that they give you as well is using the N and U buttons for, so N lets you search down and then U searches up, or is that paging?
After your first search,
right.
So you have to do the first search using slash or question mark,
right.
And then after that you can continue to use slash and question mark, or you can use N and U, and those will move to the next or previous entry, so you can look and find those. There's a lot of shortcuts that are available for these things. And these programs are a lot more powerful too. I'm just showing you some of the key features to get by. I think the searching forward and backwards is a pretty key feature though. So, but you'll see here that less is actually a lot more powerful than more. And I know a lot of people who alias it, so anytime they go to run more, it actually runs less instead. But both commands are pretty standard on operating systems these days, and you'll find them just installed by default, right? I didn't have to install more, I didn't install less, or cat for that matter. All of them are there. It's just me making a decision. Do I want the whole volume of text displayed at once? Use cat. Do I just want simple pagination and I'm only moving forward like in a log file? Well, more is fine. But if I want full flexibility to move backwards and forward, less is the best one. So all three are available. You kind of choose for your scenario. You really can't go wrong with less if it's you. But programmatically, less is really annoying. So programmatically, you'd want to go with cat.
Now, Don, what if I have a huge file, much like Moby Dick? Typically, though, as a user, I've probably got some log files that I need to look through. But if I cat the file, it's gonna dump the entire log. It's gonna be a very large. I'm gonna have to scroll through it. I could use more and less. But what if I just want to see what was the last entry, or the last few entries?
A log file is a great example of that, right? Yeah. So when my system boots up, it generates this big log file, and I might want to see just the first couple of lines or the last couple of lines of the log. Show me the last things that happened. I just got an error, so I know the entry is right there at the end. So I could use a command like more or less or cat to view the log and see the whole thing. But if I just want to see the beginning or the end, you've got the tail and the head commands, right? Or heads and tails, right?
Heads and tails.
Head shows you the beginning of a file, and tail shows you the end of a file. And by default, they show you 10 lines, but you can customize that however you want. So if I want to see just the first 10 lines of the Moby Dick file, I could come in here and I could type head mobydick.txt. And when I run that, there's the first 10 lines, and that's it. It stops, right? It never even got to call me Ishmael, right? So it just displayed the first 10 lines, and there it is. Or I can tail and ruin the ending of the story and do mobydick.txt. And oh, good.
It's Project Gutenberg stuff.
I didn't ruin the ending. They've got a little footer there. So I see just the last 10 lines. Well, maybe I want the last 15 lines or the first lines until I get to that call me Ishmael, right? Yeah. Well, with each of these, if you take a look at like the head command, if I take a look at its documentation, you'll see that it's got this -n option where you can specify the number of lines that you want. So I could say head-n15 mobydick.txt. And now it's going to give me the first 15 lines, and there it is. There's call me Ishmael. Or if I really wanted to be strict and not even get that 15th line, I could drop that down to 14, and now there I am, and I get it, and we can kind of roll forward from there. Tail works the same way. I might want to tail the last 50 lines, and you can do that, and you'll get just those last 50, and they'll come up. Now, another neat thing is you can actually combine some of these commands together, and there's times where we might want to do that. I might have a large file like Moby Dick. When I use less on the Moby Dick file, it loads the entire file into memory so that I can scroll through it, right? So the bigger the file, the more of it's going to go into memory. Well, maybe I only want to look at the first 100 lines. I know that head can do that. I can say head-n100 for Moby Dick, right? But now I'm not getting my ability to scroll and search. So I loaded less into memory, but I didn't, I loaded less content into memory. You gotta be careful here. But I kind of lost the ability to use scrolling and searching and all that. So I could take the head command or the cat command, and I could take their output and send it to one of the other commands. In the Linux and Unix command prompt, you can use the pipe symbol. It's the two vertical lines. It's usually right above your enter key and shares the backslash key. You can use the pipe symbol to say, take the output from one command and send it to another command. So I could take the output from head-n100 and I could send it to less. And now I get all the advantages of less for the first 100 lines of Moby Dick. So I haven't loaded as much into RAM. And that can be really handy. See how I just reached the end of the file and I'm not even through chapter 1 of the book. I'm combining the commands together, right? And you'll see people who do like where they cat a file and then they redirect it into the more command, right? To say, I want to see the whole file, but I want pagination, so I'll use more to do it, which is really redundant because you could just say more for the Moby Dick file, and it's the same result, right? But they work, right? You can take the output from one command and feed it into another, and feeding it into less or feeding it into tail, that'll help you to just get the information that you want. So it's a great way to kind of view and manipulate that text and see what's going on.
All right, Don, when we've been working with files that we already have on our system, what if I wanted to create my own file?
All right, so if I want to create my own file, basically I need to get data in there. And we're going to see later on, there's various text editors we can use, like Vim and Nano and all those guys. But a lot of times the data is coming from somewhere on our system. So I mentioned, for example, that there is a log that's generated when my system boots up, right? If I use the dmesg command, dmesg, dmesg. If I run the dmesg command, it shows me my boot log, okay? And it's a lot of data. In fact, a lot of this this isn't even my boot. This is me bouncing from access point to access point here in the building. But we've got, I don't know, 14 access points or something. So anytime you move access points, it generates a log message. But somewhere back here in the beginning, I'm going to encounter where my system actually booted up, right? Which, you know, it might have been a few days since I rebooted. But here's a great example where my terminal only has a buffer of 10,000 lines. So if I haven't rebooted in a few days, then I might not even be able to scroll all the way back to where this thing started, right? So I might have a problem there. In fact, I could use the uptime command to find out. It's been 2 days. Yeah, 2 days and an hour since I've rebooted. So I'd have to go back quite a ways to actually find the boot log, right? But what I could do is I could take that dmesg output and I could put it into a file, and I could then use less and search through it, or more, or head, tail. I could use all that other stuff on the data. So I want to take the output of this command and I want to send it into a file. And we can do that through a few different means, right? We can either do it live where the file already exists, or we can create files ahead of time and then add the data into them. And it's kind of up to us how we want to go about that. But just to show you a quick example here, I'm going to do a dmesg, and I'm going to use a greater than symbol. And a greater than symbol says, take the output of whatever the first command is, and then stick it somewhere else, right, into a file somewhere else. And so I'm going to take this dmesg output, and I'm going to put it into bootlog.txt, okay? So it's going to run. And what do I see on the screen? Nothing, right? Instead of putting this data on my screen, it redirected it. It redirected that output from standard out to this file, bootlog.txt. And if I take a look at my directory, I've now got a bootlog.txt. And if I pull the long output for that, I'm going to make that human readable, it is 336K, not as long as Moby Dick, for the record, but
still substantial.
Yeah. And now I can come in and I can take the command like less, and I could feed into it that bootlog.txt, and now it starts from the very beginning. And here is where my computer booted up. I see the Linux kernel initializing right there, and it initialized my C groups, the processor groups, and then memory is initializing. This is when my computer booted up. I'm right here at the beginning, and I can search through and I can look for things. Maybe I want to find if there were any errors that occurred. I might be error-free. Apparently I am. So I'm error-free. But I can search through and look for various things. Maybe I want to find where it mounted a hard drive or something like that. And so I can search and I can find that, and here it is. And I might be thousands of lines in, but I just jumped to it and got there. So we can pull that information really easily. And I got the data into this file by just doing a redirect. I took the output of one command, dmessage, and I used the greater than symbol and then dump it right into a text file.
And this text file, this bootlog.txt, did not exist. So Linux created it and said, oh, you want this, it's not there, I'll just make that file and put this content inside of it.
Yeah, yep, that's basically how it works. And so now I've got that file and it's there. There are a few other ways that we could have done this to get the data in there. And there's other things that I could have output into it. If I run this command again, it's going to overwrite that bootlog.txt. So what was that? Whatever was in bootlog is going to get overwritten with whatever's in the new dmessage command. Or if I ran something else, maybe I ran uname-a like that. And the uname-a command, if you're not familiar with that one, it just shows what kernel you're running, right? So if that's all I wanted to know, I didn't have to go to my dmessage for that. I could have pulled it right from uname. Or you can run uname by itself, and it just says you're running Linux, which is pretty pointless. But if I want uname-a and I send that into bootlog.txt, the file already exists. So what does it do? It overwrites the file. And so now when I take a look at bootlog.txt, that's all it's got, is that one line, that one little entry, and I just lost all the dmessage stuff that was in there, okay? So when you do a redirect like this, if the file already exists, you need to make a decision. You might want to overwrite it, in which case you just redirect like I did. But you might want to append and say, I want to add on to the end of that file instead, okay? And you can do that by doing by screwing up the prompt, by doing two greater than signs, right? By doing this, by saying, and I'll change it so it's dmessage this time. I'm going to do dmessage and two greater than symbols, bootlog.txt. That's going to take the dmessage output and stick it on the end of that file. So don't overwrite it, add to it. And this is oftentimes what we want. And when I run that, again, I don't get any output on my screen, but when I take a look at bootlog.txt, there's the output for uname-a right at the top. And then after that starts the output for dmessage, all right after it. I just appended and added on to it. So a single greater than sign versus a double greater than sign, that's going to move that data and get it in there.
Well, Don, these redirectors seem pretty handy. Are there any others that we need to be aware of when it comes to redirection?
There's a few others that are a little more useful, like in our scripting series. I know we'll redirect errors. When you run a program, there's two different outputs that you get. There's the successful output with data, and then there's the error output if there's a problem, if something goes wrong. And so you might want to redirect just the good stuff or just the error. Well, by default, it is just outputting the good stuff. So when the command runs, the greater than symbol is grabbing the good stuff and putting it where you want it to go, right? That's standard out. But there's standard error also, stderr. And standard error is just the errors if you have them. Now, I didn't have any errors, so there was nothing to output, right? If I run dmessage and I just do the normal thing that I've been doing here so far, that's redirecting the standard out, the good stuff. And if I want the errors, what I need to do is stick a 2 before it, okay? The first output is the good stuff. The second output are the errors. And if there are any errors, it will take them and dump them into bootlog.txt. Now, when I run that, see how I got stuff on the screen? That's because I didn't redirect the standard out. The standard out still goes to wherever it's supposed to go, which is my screen. Just the errors get redirected. And if I take a look at bootlog.txt, it's now empty because there were no errors. There were no errors to output. But if there were errors, they get saved there. And that's a great way, like when you're running a script, to say, I need to log the errors somewhere else. And you can do that by redirecting it this way and dumping it that way. All right. Another thing is that the redirectors, you can flip it around. And instead of taking the output of a command and sending it into a file, I can do the opposite, where I take the contents of a file and I send them into a command. All right. So for example, let's say I do, ls-lh, right? That shows me all the files that are in my directory, all right? Or just ls for that matter. And I see the files that are in my directory. Well, I might want to take those and alphabetize them. And actually, it won't work here because it's all in one line.
Alphabetized.
And it's is it?
Yeah.
Oh, it does alphabetize, doesn't it? So, so if I wanted to take this though and feed it into some other command, I could take a document. I could take like Moby Dick for that matter, right? And let's say that I wanted to take the contents of Moby Dick and alphabetize it. I don't know why you want to do this, but you can use the sort command to alphabetize anything, right? So if you look at the syntax for the sort command, it tells you to provide it a file, and it'll take that file and it will sort it to match what you need. So for example, if I take here, let's just do like /user/bin. All right. So here's a bunch of binaries, and they're already alphabetized for me in here, right? But if I take that directory listing and I'm going to drop that into a file called binaries.txt. Okay. Well, maybe I want that. I want to be able to see the files that are in there, right? So if I take a look at my new binaries.txt file, here's all the binaries, and they're alphabetized from A to Z. Okay. Well, maybe that's not what I want. Maybe I want it to be from Z to A, right? Well, if I do it from a command, I could say ls/user/bin, and I could pipe the output into the sort command, which by default would sort alphabetically. And I could sort it with a -r to reverse the sort order, and there it goes, right? And I'd have to scroll back to see it all, but now it was from Z to A. The A's were at the end, versus if I did sort without the -r, the Z's would be at the end. Okay, that's good if you can run the command now. But if somebody gives you a file, the command's already been run, and so you've got this data, this output from a database, and I might want to sort it and change that order. What I could do is I could use the sort command, and I could do a less than symbol and feed in a file like that. I'm going to take that text file and make it input instead of output. Instead of taking the output of a command and saving it, I'm taking the file as an input and feeding it into the command, doing it the other way around. And now I can do that, and it sorts it from A to Z. And I could even go further. We get really crazy with this. And then I could pipe that into the less command. And now we really get some fun, right? And here's the Z's first going all the way down to the A. And we're kind of 3 levels deep, right? I redirected the file as input, and then I redirected all of that into the less command. Now you can keep going on this. It's called pipelining. You can keep going, adding command after command after command to really create some powerful scenarios. So if you mix all these together, you can really get some great information. Information put the way that you want it to be.
Yeah, it's a fun thing. They call them one-liners a lot of times. There's a site called Bash One-Liners, and they just give you crazy one-liners that you can type in on a single line and hit it. It does a lot of amazing, powerful stuff. Very cool.
Yep.
Now, Don, I know we got a little bit of time left. I don't know if you want to try to finish this up or...
No, I've got a couple other things. I want to talk about, like copying files, moving files, deleting files, renaming files. I also want to talk about file expansion, how we can kind of create files. Something I kind of missed in my notes here, so we need to cover that. So let's do a part 2 on this one,
right.
And we'll tackle some of those other elements that all kind of come into this. So really what we did here in this episode was all really just looking at the contents of a file. And sure, we created some, but we were really just redirecting content somewhere else. So now I want to talk about how we actually create some files, and we'll do that in part 2.
All right. Well, Don, look forward to that part 2. Thanks for joining us today. We do thank you, good folks out there, for watching. But as the man has said, we are out of time for this episode. So join us back for that part 2. We're going to give you a lot more good stuff when it comes to working with files in the Linux command line. As for us, though, signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.